Welcome to the Think Tank Live. Today with me I have, as always, Mr. Andrew Coulson and Brian Cannan with me. How are you, gentlemen?
How are you?
Hi, Lucas.
Good. We're going to be talking today about auction day scenarios and handling the tougher auction day scenarios. I think a good place to start is handling the bidding registration, because if we can iron out a couple of issues there, it can make the whole day run a little bit more smoother for everyone involved. So tell me, what's the best thing to look at when you're registering buyers? What's the best thing to keep in mind?
I think if you start with a good venue for your registrations, you want to make sure that you've got a nice, bright, sunny place, plenty of room. Probably the dining room's your best place that you're going to start. You've got to make sure that you've got your bidders register there, you've got your bidders guides, your bidding numbers, your terms and conditions. Give yourself plenty of space. Make sure it's nice and quiet, so that, because you've got to keep that information private and confidential.
It's true.
So setting up that room where it's a little bit out of the way, but very easy to get to. People can stand there and do their registrations. Good start.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously when people actually come and want to register, there's a couple of good, intelligent questions we can ask here to as I said, lend itself to helping the whole process run smoothly. So what are those questions?
Best practice from our point of view would be, one of the first questions as they walk up and want to register, is your name one of the names going on the contract? Yes, then you can ask for the identification, ask for their ID. As you're doing that, you could ask, are you bidding on your own behalf? Yes, and then as you're registering, you might ask how you're paying the 10% deposit.
And obviously there's many reasons and many scenarios, because if we get 3 yeses, it can obviously make it a little easier. If there's a no, we then need to work out, and inquire a little bit more about it.
We've all faced a scenario where the hammers come down, everybody walks inside to complete the contracts, and all of a sudden the purchaser says, I want to put this in my son's name.
He wishes.
Yeah, that ain't going to happen. Or they say, I want to put it in my company name. Or I don't have my checkbook.
Yeah.
Or can I do an electronic funds transfer? All of those scenarios arrive after the fall of the hammer. It would be so much easier to deal with that scenario before you get to there.
Yeah. Oh, before on the auction day, or even the Thursday or the Friday before, if we could ask those questions, leading into the auction, where we can, talk to solicitors, talk to the right people to get things organised prior to. But doesn't always work to plan. We know these things, and one of the common, we could pick any one of the scenarios that you just mentioned, but looking at bidding on behalf of a company. Yep. There's always the one buyer who, maybe, the sole director of the company, he says, my solicitor, he didn't tell me that I needed to complete, a letter of authority on a company letterhead with an ABN and an ACN. I've been to many auctions in the past where I didn't have to do that. Why are you telling me I have to register this way?
That's right. You've got a lot of experts that turn up with that.
Yep.
We always recommend you use your bidder's guide.
My friend. That's my friend. That's your best agent's friend you can have at an auction.
It's issued by Fair Trading. It's got their details all over it, and it's not you making a decision on what the rules are. It's Fair Trading setting them down, and it says if you're bidding for a company, the letter of authority must be on the company letterhead, and the ABN will be recorded in the bidder's record as the company's proof of identity. No arguments.
It's the government, it's Fair Trading, it's written on the paper that we have to give you, and it says this is what we must have in order for you to bid on behalf of the company.
So if we ask that question, are you bidding on your own behalf? No, I want to put it in my super fund. Here's an authority document that you'll need to complete, or give us a letterhead on a blank sheet of paper, write down the ABN number, and there's your authority.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. So let's move forward now, because asking those 3 questions are hopefully going to handle a lot of problems, whether it be Thursday, Friday before the auction, or at least before the auction starts. So we can work out what can be done. Let's move to post-auction. So let's say the property has been sold. Okay.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
To all parties.
Happy days. Let's go home.
We're transitioning into a more interesting market. What's one of the big tips you would give to all the agents out there?
Yeah, when you sell the property, I think we've got to do what we used to do, and that is keep the underbid around. Now, at this stage, the underbidder's a really good buyer. They just missed out, so you want to talk to them and see if you can find something else. But more importantly, if you go inside and there are some issues, you may want to have the underbidder there that you can talk to, and maybe they could still buy the property.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a number of things we need to do, obviously, which we're going to get to in terms of signing contracts and getting to that point. But there is the odd instance where maybe the buyer's gone a little bit, they've overextended themselves a little more than they wished, or they're unable or unwilling to sign on the contract in that day. And there are two things that we need to look at here: the theory and then the practical application. In theory, what should happen?
Well, in theory, when the gavel or the hammer goes down, the auctioneer is agent for both vendor and purchaser. And so if either party won't sign, then the auctioneer has an obligation to sign. And that's a theory, and it does happen. I've signed contracts for both parties at different times. But the practicality may be not to sign the contract and talk to the underbidder who you've kept around and get instructions from your vendor as to what they'd like you to do, because there's some legal ramifications. If you get the auctioneer to sign to the highest bidder and they don't want to buy it, you could be in court for a long time.
Well, that's right. The vendors entered into a contract with the purchaser. They can't just change their mind at a later stage very easily to be able to sell it to another party. If they've entered into a contract and then they're going to pursue that, there'll be solicitors' fees involved, additional costs. It may be in the vendor's best interest to rescind the contract because the purchaser has not proceeded with it.
Not only cost, it's the time. I mean, the last one that I followed took 18 months to go through the courts. Now, the vendor won. All rights were on the vendor side. And yes, they did receive damages. But 18 months meant that they couldn't get on to what they wanted to do at that time. And they'd better to, as you said, rescind the contract and talk to the underbidder and sell it to them and not waste or have that 18 months tied up.
That's it. So that's a scenario if they don't want to sign the contract, they don't have the sufficient deposit, that sort of thing. But again, hopefully we're going to have the right...
So you'd need to get instructions from the vendor, what you want to do. You've got to be careful here because you can't give legal advice. You just give them the scenarios and let them sort out what they'd like you to do. But you give them, but before you do anything, you get your instructions in writing from the vendor of what they want you to do to protect yourself.
There's no doubt about that. It's certainly, but whatever the scenario may be, keeping that underbidder there from a theory point, from a practical point of view, rather than going down to legal proceedings, we could obviously, I mean, the bid may have only been $1,000 less. It may have been $5,000 less. And so to keep that underbidder there gives a little bit more of a practical option for the vendors to choose if they so.
The last one that we had issues with was that the purchaser had come to the auction and decided to buy on the day, and they wanted a 6-month settlement and a 5% deposit, and that didn't suit the owner. So we rescinded the contract and sold it to the underbidder, and it was for $1,000 less.
But hopefully that's not going to be your scenario. Hopefully we're going to walk into the room, we're going to transfer the name that's in the bidder's register for that lucky number, and we're going to put that onto the contract.
Any other name they want on there?
And whatever other name.
To sign?
That's correct. That's correct. So only the person whose name is going to be on the contract, they need to register. They can add other parties' names to that contract if they are there to sign, and then we get them to go. So we make sure we've got our two identical contracts so that we can exchange those contracts, make sure every page is exactly the same. Ideally, we'd have an authority to exchange that we'd get our vendor and our purchaser to sign, acknowledging that exchange has taken place.
And giving your instructions.
And giving their instructions. And we're going to go through that process of completing that contract, having all parties sign it, and confirm the exchange is taken. And then we have how many days to send that contract on?
Well, under the rules of conduct, you've got 2 business days to get it to their legal advisors.
Sometimes we run into the problem though, where we've got a willing buyer, a willing seller. We've had the auction, it's sold. They are willing to sign the contract, obviously exchange, and then we get to the bit where we obviously need to talk about the deposit. And they said, "Oh, yeah, not a problem. I'm happy. I'm just going to obviously EFT it over to you. What are your details?" What's the problem we need to look out for everyone out there?
Well, an EFT, now, I know that a lot of people don't have checkbooks, so they've got to think about how they're going to bring their checkbook. You can get a cashier's check or a counter's check, or you can get a bank check, preferably not cash. But the issue here is EFT is that it's not deemed that it's a deposit that the agent has received until it's in their account. So if they EFT you on a Saturday, you won't get it till the Monday. So you're taking liability for that for that period of time. So if you are going to EFT, there's a couple of things. One, you're going to have to get written instructions from the owner that wants you to do that. And two, with EFT, I've only had it once when we did this that they could actually give you the full deposit. Most people have a limit per day limit of how much you can EFT, 5, 10 or 20,000. So that's not enough to really make the 5% deposit up. So there's a number of issues
Sydney
here.
anyway.
Well, yeah, true, not in Sydney, yeah. There's a number of issues with EFT. Now, if the EFT didn't hit your account on the Monday and they change their mind, and they can, the scary part is that the agent is liable for the 10% if you didn't get the written instructions from your vendor.
That's the key thing, isn't it? I mean, it's the vendor's contract.
Yep.
The vendor's contract says 10% to be paid
Yep.
on exchange. If the vendor agrees to 5% or $10,000 with the balance to be paid on Monday, or electronic funds transfer, they've got the option of doing that. But of course, we need to get that authority in writing
Yep.
to make sure that we're covered off on that.
So we're not taking the burden.
That's right.
And remember, we can't give them legal advice around that
No,
either.
that's right. That's right.
And maybe a copy of their transaction as well to prove that it obviously was put into the right hand. So there's certainly some things we want to look at there.
Good.
If they wanted to do EFT and you knew it early, they could EFT into your trust account, by the Friday, and that means you're right to go for the Saturday. That would be the better way of doing it.
A lot of buyers would like to do that.
Well, if they want to bid on the property, we've had overseas buyers who wanted to bid and they had to put the money in the account prior to the auction, and they've done that.
Yeah.
And they can again look at raising their limit if we're doing it on the Thursday or the Friday as well, which can help. So let's look at now when properties pass in, because
A couple of those.
it's a couple of those happening nowadays. Now, I suppose a common theory out there is who can negotiate when a property's been passed in. So there are 3 people registered.
Yep.
Are they the only people who are able to negotiate on that particular day?
It's a common phrase used by a lot of us to say that you'll be the highest bidder and you'll have the first right to negotiate. And whilst it's a common practice, it's not always best practice.
I don't use it.
What would we rather use?
Look, there are strategies around auctions, and some agents at times want to try and push the buyers by saying the highest bidder has the opportunity of doing something. But it's not negotiate, it's the first right of refusal at the reserve price. And we've forgotten that term, and that term is something that we can use. It's not something I like to use. I have used it as a strategy, and it has worked. But I question, why are we giving buyers rights in the first place? We're at an auction. I would rather pass it in and let all buyer parties know, whether registered or not, they can have a chance to negotiate right now.
Yeah, I think it's important that the agents understand the difference between that, so that they can say, you'll go to the highest bidder who may have the first right of refusal. So there's the reserve price. Do you want to exchange at that? Well, you've now exercised your first right to refusal.
Yes or no?
I'm now going to negotiate, offer the same right of refusal to any other parties. And they don't have to be registered parties at that point.
After the property's passed
After the property has...
Yeah, so it's a courtesy that the auctioneer can give, okay? And it is a courtesy if they want to, and that is, again, the first right of refusal at the reserve price, not the first right to negotiate. That means nothing. As a matter of fact, there could be argument that it could tie you down, that you can only deal with that party who was the highest bidder while they kept offering more and more and more, which could be, $1,000, $1,000, $1,000, and you can't go to the other buyers while he does that. I mean, if I was the highest bidder and you did it to me, you started talking to the other buyers, I'd be very cranky because you gave me the first right to negotiate, not first right of refusal.
There's no end point there, is there?
No.
First right to refusal is you get to see it and you get to give a yes or a no answer.
Exactly right.
Okay, so there's a lot there. So if anyone is able to negotiate if the property's passed in,
Depending how you pass it in.
depending on how you pass it in, some strategy is to encourage a little bit of bidding, is to use that first right. Very important to explain it's the first right to refusal as opposed to first right to negotiate. So there's certainly a great tip there. But then we've also got the cooling off period. So let's start with, when does the cooling off period start? Because I had an instance only not that long ago where the auction was set for 12 noon, and a party couldn't or didn't want to make it at the auction, and at 10 o'clock made an offer and wanted to sign the contract before the auction, so a couple of hours before.
Okay.
Are they purchasing it
On
without
auction
a
day.
cooling off on an auction day? Yeah, on the day of the auction,
That's
are they
good.
purchasing it without a cooling off period?
Well, the auction commences at 12 o'clock. The auctioneer goes through the terms and conditions, starts the auction, opens the bidding. That's when the terms of the auction take place.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it is the same as the day before, the week before. Any sale that is made before the opening of the auction is done with a cooling off period.
Mm-hmm.
They would need to come up with a 66W to waive the cooling off period if they were to do it at 10 o'clock.
If you exchanged it at 10 o'clock without that 66W, you've given the cooling off period to the buyer.
Mm.
And then if the owner then goes that afternoon to buy a property at auction, he's bought without a cooling off period. And if you advise them that they didn't have one, I'd hate to be in that case.
Mm. Mm.
So it doesn't
With the
start
agent in that
until the auctioneer has gone through the terms and conditions and has commenced the auction. And then obviously if it passes in now at this point,
Mm-hmm.
when does it finish?
12 o'clock, midnight that day. Terms and conditions of the auction remain, so that any negotiations that take place that lead to an exchange of contracts are done under auction conditions, and there is no cooling off period there.
Is that with anyone?
Yeah, anybody can then join in the negotiations. You could have somebody in the crowd that thinks, I'm interested in the property at this price, and whilst the underbidders might not like it, they can join into negotiations and not have to register and still purchase the property, but it will be under auction conditions.
Just make sure you use the right authority to exchange form, because the one you use there is they are knowing that they're exchanging without a cooling off period. That's very important indeed to protect yourself.
And where would we find all these outstanding forms, Brian?
Lucas?
You can go to our website. We've got them in there. You look at our auction page. We've got some forms in there, reserve letters. Obviously, we've got the bidders' registers as well. You can get those. There are 4 authorities to exchange, so you can have a look at those as well.
One of our clients, a long-standing client of ours, he likes to auction 9 or 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. He does that because he says it gives me all day Saturday, if I don't sell, to be able to exchange at a cooling off period. That's his theory, and it works for him very well.
Gets a couple more hours, depending, rather than doing the afternoon.
Good understanding of the laws.
Well, we hope that helps everyone out there. On behalf of Andrew, Brian and myself, thank you very much for joining us. If you had any questions, feel free to comment below. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.